My name is Amara Fielding, and the day I died was February 3rd, 2023. I still remember that morning like a whisper echoing in a quiet church, calm, ordinary, full of routine and expectation. I had gone into the hospital for a simple laparoscopic procedure, something I had rescheduled twice because of work. I didn't think twice about it. I even joked with the nurse about bringing me some orange Jell-O when I woke up. But I never expected that I'd flatline on that table, that my heart would stop beating, and my soul would lift out of my body while the world I knew kept spinning without me. The first sign that something had gone wrong wasn't pain. It was silence. Not the silence you hear in a quiet room, but the kind of absolute stillness that makes you feel like you've stepped outside of time itself. 1 second I was in the operating room surrounded by beeping monitors and bright lights, and the next, I was floating above it all, watching from a distance. My body lay lifeless beneath the blue sheets. The surgeon's hands trembled. A nurse pressed frantically on my chest. Someone shouted something about my vitals. But I wasn't afraid. I wasn't even confused. I just felt like I had slipped into a different dimension of knowing. It's hard to explain what it feels like to see your body from the outside. There's a strange tenderness in it. You suddenly realize how fragile you are, how everything you thought was you is just borrowed skin and breath. I didn't feel panic. I felt peace, and then I felt light. Not metaphorical light, literal, radiant, living light that pulled at me like gravity wrapped in warmth. I didn't resist it. I let it take me. As I drifted higher, I passed through what looked like a veil of golden mist. The hospital faded behind me like a dream, and in front of me was something I will never have the vocabulary to describe. A realm so vibrant, so saturated with love, that my earthly senses would have burst trying to contain it. And standing in the center of it was him, Jesus. He wasn't the pale, robe-wearing figure I had grown up seeing in stained glass. He was light itself, majestic, humble, powerful, and familiar all at once. His eyes weren't just looking at me, they were looking through me, into every corner of my soul that I had ever hidden from even myself. And still he loved me, not for what I had done, not for how well I served in church or tithed or prayed, but simply because I was his. I wanted to fall to my knees, but I couldn't even feel a body anymore. I was just a soul unraveling in the presence of perfect love. And then he spoke, not with words, but with spirit. His voice bypassed my ears and landed directly in my being. You studied my word, he said. You followed me. You trusted me. But there is something deeper you have yet to understand. Come, let me show you why my chosen ones are struggling. Struggling? I blinked, if a soul could blink. I thought of the bills piling on my kitchen counter, the times I gave in offerings when I didn't even have enough to cover rent, the sleepless nights praying for breakthrough. Was this finally the answer I had begged for? He led me, not by hand, but by presence. As we moved, I saw what I can only describe as realms of reality. Dimensions layered on top of each other like pages in a book. And there, between the spaces of heaven and earth, I saw it, the invisible war. The spiritual reasons behind what I thought were just natural struggles. Financial delays, broken dreams, scarcity cycles, they weren't just the result of bad luck or missed opportunities. They were spiritual symptoms of something deeper. Jesus stopped and looked at me again, this time with a mix of love and divine seriousness. My chosen ones suffer, he said, not because they are forgotten, but because they carry wounds in places they refuse to examine. I didn't know what to say. My soul trembled with recognition. He began to show me more, and what I saw unraveled everything I thought I knew about faith, finance, and alignment. As I stood before Jesus in that radiant realm beyond time, I felt stripped bare, yet completely secure. Every part of me was known. Not just my decisions or deeds, but my desires, my disappointments, my buried doubts. I didn't have to defend myself. In His presence, there was no room for pretense, only truth and mercy. And as He began to reveal the reason behind the financial struggles of His chosen ones, I felt like I was watching the layers of the world peel back to expose what had always been there but never seen. Money is not the root, Jesus said softly. It is the mirror. The moment those words resonated through me, I was pulled into what felt like a living vision. I could see scenes, not just of my life, but of countless others. Faithful people, worshipers, givers, prayer warriors, and yet they were entangled in debt, job loss, eviction notices, empty fridges. They were the ones who always served last, gave first, and yet lacked the very provision they believed God would deliver. It didn't make sense until I saw what Jesus wanted me to see. There were wounds, invisible wounds layered into their spirits, into my spirit, not physical, but spiritual distortions that altered the way we received and steward provision. The first wound He showed me was fear. It slithered around hearts like a chain, fear of not having enough, fear of giving too much, fear of taking the wrong step. I saw myself holding back from opportunities out of fear I wasn't good enough, spiritual enough, prepared enough. I called it wisdom. Jesus called it unbelief masquerading as prudence. Then came comparison. It looked like a mirror shattered into fragments, each piece reflecting someone else's blessing while distorting our own. I had compared my journey to others so many times that I forgot the beauty of my own assignment. Jesus showed me how many of His chosen ones waste spiritual energy trying to measure up to someone else's calling. What you envy, He said, you secretly reject in yourself. I wept inside, not from shame, but from recognition. I had begged God for increase while secretly despising my current portion. How could He multiply what I refused to honor? The third wound was imbalance. This one looked like a pendulum swinging wildly between striving and surrender. I saw chosen believers overworking themselves into burnout, then collapsing in despair, expecting God to pick up the slack. I was one of them. I hadn't built rhythms of rest. I had built altars to hustle. I sacrificed sleep, peace, and health for a version of provision God never asked me to chase. And then He showed me entitlement, not in the arrogant way I expected, but subtle, quiet. It whispered things like, I've served so much, God owes me a breakthrough. Jesus revealed that this posture blocks heaven's flow. You cannot receive from grace while negotiating with pride, He said. The words didn't sting, they freed me. The final wound was the most heartbreaking, orphanhood. A deep-rooted belief that we are abandoned, that we must fight for scraps, that we are on our own. I saw chosen ones acting like spiritual beggars, begging God for help when they were already seated at His table. And I saw myself, how I doubted His generosity, how I clung to control because I didn't fully trust one was provided for. By the end of the vision, I was trembling. Jesus had shown me not just symptoms, but root causes. You see the drought, He said, but I see the soil. His words soaked into me like living water. Then He gently placed His hand over where my heart would have been. "You are not cursed," he whispered. "You are cluttered." That one sentence undid me. I broke. I cried. I surrendered. He told me that many of his children, especially the chosen ones called to lead and speak and serve, are going through this stripping season, not as punishment, but as purification. He called it a holy drought. "I withheld the rain," he said, "so you would find the well." The well wasn't a bank account. It wasn't a job. It wasn't a strategy. It was him. The clarity hit me like a flood. My financial struggle hadn't been about earthly lack. It had been about spiritual misalignment. I had given, served, sacrificed, but I had also feared, compared, controlled, and doubted. And while the world blamed economy, inflation, and bad luck, Jesus revealed what no algorithm could ever calculate. Breakthrough begins where the heart breaks open. In that moment, I knew he wasn't finished. He was just beginning to prepare me for something far greater than personal prosperity. He was about to show me the vision of restoration, what happens after the clutter is cleared, after the roots are healed, and after the chosen rise into alignment. After Jesus exposed the roots behind the suffering of his chosen ones, I expected to feel disqualified, broken beyond repair. But what came next changed everything. His eyes, full of flame and tenderness, looked into me as if to say, "Now that you understand the sickness, let me show you the cure." I braced myself, and then with a wave of his hand, he opened the sky above us, and I saw a vision of restoration. It wasn't what I expected. There were no vaults of gold, no angelic banks raining money. Instead, I saw fields of soil that had once been dry and cracked, now bursting with new green shoots, vibrant, tender, and alive. "This," Jesus said, "is what happens when you heal the roots." The fields represented the lives of chosen ones, hearts once paralyzed by fear, now rooted in trust, minds once twisted by comparison, now secure in identity. Then I saw chains, hundreds of them, falling off the wrists of people kneeling in prayer. Not chains of metal, but of shame. Jesus explained that financial bondage often thrives not in what we lack, but in what we believe we are unworthy of. The moment those people believed they were sons and daughters instead of survivors and servants, the chains broke like paper in fire. A woman stood up in the vision, her hands empty, her head bowed low. But as she lifted her eyes to heaven, a light enveloped her. Her clothes changed. Her countenance changed. Then resources, money, food, relationships, open doors began flowing toward her. She hadn't chased them. They came because she had aligned. "You don't attract provision by pursuing it," Jesus said. "You attract it by becoming whole." That struck me. He wasn't promising us luxury. He was promising us enough, but only once our spirits were healed enough to receive and steward it. I saw that when we carry unresolved fear, pride, or insecurity, even blessings feel like burdens. But when we're rooted in humility, gratitude, and obedience, even little becomes much. He then showed me 3 key principles, simple, but radiant with power. 1, confession is the key. The vision shifted to people kneeling in prayer, not begging, but confessing. They weren't asking for money. They were naming their idols, their fears, their mistrust. And as they did, golden light poured into their hearts. Jesus said, "Heaven cannot fill what pride will not empty." That phrase seared into me like truth etched in fire. 2, realignment opens doors. I saw people reordering their lives, not just budgeting better, but recentering their entire existence around God's presence. They started their days with worship instead of worry, gave generously even when it didn't make sense, and took bold steps of faith. And suddenly, doors that had long been closed burst open. When your spirit aligns, your surroundings shift, Jesus said. 3. Forgiveness releases flow. This part caught me off guard. I saw people who were tithing, fasting, serving, but still struggling. Jesus pointed to their hearts, and inside were faces, people they hadn't forgiven. Bitterness had become a dam, blocking blessing. You cannot hold someone in bondage and walk in freedom, he said. One by one, as people forgave, even silently, rivers of abundance flowed again. It wasn't dramatic, it was holy. He then turned to me, and I realized this wasn't just a teaching, it was an invitation. He said gently, Amara, there are things I want to give you, but I love you too much to place them into unhealed hands. I broke down in tears. I had asked for more, not realizing my soul was already overflowing with fear, distrust, self-doubt. I had no room. Jesus didn't shame me. He simply reached out, and with his touch, I felt burdens I didn't know I was carrying begin to dissolve. Not just about finances, but about identity, worth, trust. I had thought I needed a breakthrough. What I needed was a breaking open. Suddenly, I saw flashes of future moments, myself speaking to others, helping them recognize the same spiritual roots. I saw circles of women crying together, repenting together, praying for each other. I saw men reuniting with estranged children, people sowing not out of guilt, but out of joy. And over every scene, I heard the same phrase from Jesus, healing the heart heals the harvest. He showed me that this message wasn't just for me, it was a trumpet call for the entire body of Christ, especially those who have been crying out in secret, wondering why obedience still feels like drought. Tell them, he said, that I did not forget them. I am preparing them. Then Jesus raised his hand once more, and everything began to fade. The vision blurred. The light dimmed. I felt myself being pulled back toward my body, but I wasn't the same. Something had changed. I had been emptied, but I was about to return full. The return was not gentle. One moment, I was standing in the presence of Jesus, wrapped in glory, eyes open to mysteries that surpassed every book I'd read. The next, I was jolted by pain. Cold, needles, screams, a bright light overhead that wasn't holy, it was fluorescent. My chest seized like it had been lit on fire. Machines beeped, hands pushed down on me. I gasped. It was like being born again into a world that had forgotten peace. I heard someone yell, "She's back." But my eyes stung with tears, not from the light, but from what I'd just left behind. In those first hours, I couldn't speak. The doctors assumed it was trauma. They called it shock, neurological disorientation. But they didn't understand. I had seen heaven. I had met Jesus. I had learned things that changed the very structure of my soul. It wasn't my brain that was overwhelmed. It was my spirit. When I finally whispered words again, I didn't tell them everything. How could I? How do you explain that your greatest breakthrough came in death? How do you tell people that Jesus himself explained why their financial suffering might be rooted not in failure, but in fear? I didn't even know where to begin. I was discharged from the hospital a week later. Physically healed, yes, but spiritually unraveling. Every noise felt louder. Every human interaction felt thinner. I could sense pride in people's words like heat on skin. I could smell fear behind every boast. I didn't judge them, I recognized them. I had worn those masks myself, But now, I couldn't wear them anymore. The first test came in the form of a conversation with a friend who meant well. "Maybe now you'll slow down and focus on your savings," she said, sipping her overpriced latte. "You've been too generous with people. Gotta put yourself first." I nearly choked. My insides recoiled, not because of her, but because of how common that advice had become. And I realized that voice is everywhere. It's in churches, in family, in culture. That lie, the one that says survival is more important than surrender, is so normal that nobody questions it. But I had stood before the one who owns every cattle on every hill. I had looked into the eyes of truth, and he had shown me that the reason many of us are empty isn't because we gave too much, but because we gave without healing first. I couldn't pretend anymore, so I started small. I began hosting small prayer gatherings in my apartment. I shared little pieces of my experience, cautiously. Not the full NDE, just the fruit of it. I talked about spiritual alignment, about how fear of lack creates more lack, about how pride isn't just arrogance, it's the refusal to surrender. At first, people looked at me sideways, but then tears. I wasn't alone. People started opening up. A man confessed he couldn't tithe because he was too afraid of losing control. A woman admitted she'd equated financial struggle with God's punishment. One girl wept openly because she'd always believed she was too broken to be blessed. I saw it unfold exactly as I had seen in the vision, hearts unlocking one at a time. Still, I wasn't immune to backlash. Word got out. Some said I was trying to profit off a near-death delusion. Others accused me of spiritual manipulation. One pastor even told me I needed to stop talking about prosperity or I'd lose credibility. I told him I wasn't talking about prosperity, I was talking about freedom. That shut the conversation down quickly. But Jesus had already warned me, this message isn't for everyone. Some would scoff, some would slander, but those who are thirsty will drink deeply. I focused on those. I began to write pages and pages of reflections, dreams, scriptures that now exploded with new meaning. I couldn't look at Matthew 6 verse 33 the same. Seek first the kingdom. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a blueprint. And the part that struck me most was the promise that followed. And all these things will be added to you. Added. Not chased. Not struggled for. Not bargained over. Just added. I knew what Jesus meant now. When we seek Him, not just through words, but through full spiritual surrender, the kingdom is not far away. It becomes our atmosphere. And in that kingdom, there is no fear of lack. But I also understood that walking in this truth wouldn't be easy. There would be trials, times when my bank account would scream louder than my faith, times when I'd be tempted to compare, to hoard, to shrink back. But I had seen something in that realm that gave me strength. Jesus doesn't reward perfection. He honors alignment. Even when I stumbled, I'd whisper to myself, Amara, realign, and He'd meet me every time. It was a quiet morning in April when I felt the Lord nudge me. I was sipping tea, journaling by the window, the scent of rain still clinging to the air. I heard Him, clearer than ever before. Now tell them. There was no lightning, no earthquake, just stillness, and an urgency that thudded in my chest like a second heartbeat. I knew He wasn't asking me to write a book or start a business. He wanted me to speak, face to face, voice to voice, unfiltered. So, trembling, I booked a community room at a local library and invited 15 people from the prayer circle. Nothing fancy, I said. Just coffee, scripture, and truth. I didn't even have a name for the gathering, just obedience. That first night, I told them everything. From the moment my spirit left my body on that surgical table, to my face-to-face encounter with Jesus, to the shocking revelation about why so many of God's chosen are financially drowning. I spoke with no notes, just fire. I told them that what holds us back isn't a system, or a devil, or a bad economy. It's the chains we refuse to see. Chains like fear of man, like pride dressed up as independence, like self-hate masquerading as humility. And I said what Jesus told me to say. If you want breakthrough, stop trying to earn it. Start surrendering. The room was silent, not dead holy. People sat with their eyes closed, not out of boredom, but reverence. I saw one man, twice my age, pull out his wallet, hold it to his heart, and cry. The next week, we needed more chairs. By the third week, we had strangers showing up, people who had heard rumors of a woman who died and came back with fire in her mouth. Some were skeptics. Some were broken. Some were tired churchgoers looking for something real. I didn't promise miracles. I didn't take offerings. I just told the truth. And truth did what truth always does. It set people free. I watched marriages heal when couples admitted they'd been hoarding control instead of trusting God. I watched single mothers weep as they forgave fathers who left them. I watched business owners lay down their obsession with being blessed and begin seeking alignment instead. It wasn't prosperity gospel. It wasn't poverty gospel. It was kingdom gospel. And it worked. But not everyone rejoiced. Word reached a local pastor, and I was invited to speak with him. I thought it was going to be a blessing. Instead, I was told gently, but firmly, that I was dangerous, that speaking about money and faith in the same breath was divisive, that people needed stability, not shaking. I asked him, "Do you think Jesus came to bring comfort or confrontation?" He didn't answer. After that, the whispers began, that I was leading people astray, that I was emotional, that maybe the NDE wasn't real, just a trauma response. I expected it. Jesus had already told me, "You'll be doubted, but your fruit will speak." And it did. A man on disability learned to steward the little he had. And within months, doors opened for a new career. A young woman with debt and anxiety forgave her estranged father, and within weeks, checks she never expected arrived. I didn't give them formulas. I pointed them to surrender. And the fruit followed, but Jesus didn't stop speaking. One night in prayer, he showed me a field, dry, cracked. People were walking across it, some barefoot, some limping, others crawling. Each person held a seed, but the soil rejected the seed. Why? Because it had never been broken open. I heard him say, "I cannot plant wealth in hearts that will not break." I understood then, the breakthrough begins when we let him break us. That's why the chosen ones suffer. It's not punishment, it's preparation. Their finances are under pressure because their character must be refined. God is raising up a generation that won't worship the gift. They'll carry it like priests. Holy, sober, generous. I began to teach that message louder. Online, at events, wherever the Spirit led me. I wasn't building a brand. I was releasing a trumpet sound. Some hated it. Some loved it. But everyone felt it. And still I wrestled in private. There were days I questioned why he chose me. Why not a theologian? Or a pastor? Or someone with more credentials? And he whispered, because you had nothing left to protect. That's the secret. The chosen ones are those who've lost everything but him. And that's why he trusts them with more. The night before I shared my final message publicly, I barely slept. There was no storm outside, just a stillness that made my heart beat louder than usual. I woke before sunrise, lit a single candle in my prayer room, and asked the Lord what he wanted to say through me. I was expecting encouragement, maybe a final word about hope or prosperity. But what I saw instead shook me to the core. In a sudden flash, eyes open, but not mine, I was in a sanctuary filled with people, pastors, entrepreneurs, worship leaders, homemakers, college students, all with their hands lifted, all singing the same song. It was loud, so loud the floor trembled, but it wasn't holy. It was empty noise. Then the scene changed. I saw gold coins pouring into the sanctuary from the ceiling. People shouted with joy. Some danced. Others knelt. A few fought over the coins. But slowly, I began to see their hands turn black. Not from fire or filth, but from idolatry. And Jesus appeared in the center. He wasn't angry. He wasn't disappointed. But he was weeping. Not with pity, with longing. His voice echoed through the space. They asked me for wealth, but not for wisdom. They praised me for blessing, but forgot my bruises. I fell to my knees in the vision. He continued, "My chosen ones are struggling because I'm testing hearts. If I gave wealth before surrender, they would build altars to themselves. But those who surrender, those who fall in love with me, not just my miracles, they will carry my abundance without shame." When I woke, the words rang in my chest like a divine echo. First surrender, then overflow. So I spoke it, that night, from a small stage in a borrowed space. No live streams, no worship band, just me, a microphone, and the Spirit of God pulsing in every syllable. I told the people, financial breakthrough doesn't begin with a deposit. It begins with a death. Not the kind that puts you in a grave, but the kind that buries your ego. The kind that lays down your self-image, your control, your bitterness over what didn't happen when you thought it should. The kind that says, even if you never bless me again, I'll still trust you. And I wept, not from fear, but from joy, because I knew what was coming next, not just for me, but for them. That's when he gave me the last vision. I saw a river winding through cities and valleys. At first, it looked like water, but when I looked closer, it shimmered with light. It was divine provision, flowing freely, unstoppable. But the river had one rule: it could not flow where pride stood tall. Every time someone tried to dam the river with fear, or control, or ego, it rerouted. It didn't punish, it just waited, waiting for the soil to break open again. And I heard him say, "Tell them, I have prepared wells in dry places, but only the surrendered will see them. So I tell you now, with every ounce of my soul, if you're one of the chosen ones struggling with finances, don't curse the lack. Don't despise the pressure. God is not punishing you, He's purifying you. He is stripping away false foundations so you can carry real kingdom wealth, wealth rooted in righteousness, mercy, and discernment. But the key is surrender, not just once, every day, in every transaction, in every act of generosity, in every whispered prayer where you say, "God, I don't want riches, I want you." That's the moment the heavens open. That's the moment the chains fall. That's the moment you become a conduit, not just for money, but for miracles. I know it because I've lived it. I died, and Jesus showed me the spiritual roots of our financial suffering. And now I live to tell you, He is not holding back blessings. He is holding out His hand. Will you open yours? If this story touched your spirit, leave a comment below with the words, "I surrender." Tell others what part of the story hit you the hardest. And remember, when you share your testimony, you become the vessel God uses to break someone else's chains. Like, share, subscribe, and most of all, seek Him first, because everything else flows from there.